I remember also praying my own prayer, which was, God, if you can hear me, I am so sorry for wasting everything. And I'm so sorry for the things that I've done. I just want a life that's worth something. And if that means following you, then I'm in it. I'm in. And I felt something move inside me for the first time, because I'm so emotionally numb at times. And I know that was the Holy Spirit melting my heart. And I broke down, which is very un-Scottish. I cried, but I essentially went from a man who thought he was the centre of the universe, which is the nature of addiction, to suddenly looking out at something I didn't understand, but I knew I wasn't alone. Fundamentally, I wasn't alone, and that was the start of my journey with Jesus.
The Profile. You're listening to Premier Christian Radio.
You're listening to Premier Christian Radio. I'm Sam Hales, editor of Premier Christianity magazine, and you've joined us for The Profile. This is the show where we delve into a person's life, faith, and testimony. I'm delighted to say that my guest on the show today is the Scottish songwriter and worship leader, Steph Macleod. After a family breakdown leading him to find comfort in drugs, Steph ended up living rough on the streets of Edinburgh. Then in 2006, he found himself in the Bethany Christian Centre, a hostel for people dealing with his kind of circumstances. And it was during his 8-month stay there that Steph found both a living faith in Christ and healing through writing music. Now signed to Integrity Music, Steph has been praised for creating a unique sonic experience by mixing underlying folk tones with traditional and contemporary worship infused with Celtic melodies. Steph, welcome to the show.
Hello there. How's it going?
I'm very good, thank you. It's wonderful to have you on. We always like to start here on The Profile by hearing about a person's early life. So tell me a little bit about the family background. I understand you were an only child, so tell me a little bit about family and life growing up from an early age.
Yeah, that's true. Only child, and mum and dad, lovely people, worked every hour that God gave them. My dad's a civil servant. My mum was a nurse at the sick kids in the A&E department for, I think, nearly 25 years. And I was very comfortable growing up. I did spend quite a bit of time on my own. I didn't have many siblings to bounce off. I had one cousin that I'm close to, but I mean, we have a lot of cousins, but there was one, my cousin Sarah, that I bounced off of. Spent a lot of time at my grandparents, and for whatever reason, I just was quite anxious as a kid, but I didn't understand that until quite recently. I always seemed to be seeking approval. I think I was quite high maintenance as well, but when I discovered music as a youngster, that seemed to give me a real sense of focus. Eventually went to music school, which I was invited to audition for in Edinburgh successfully, and it meant that I got taught by some of the very best. I was classically trained in classical guitar and also piano, and got into jazz, and it was pretty cool. That was growing up for me. It was nothing super exciting. There was nothing severely depressing, I suppose, but just that sense of constantly seeking approval from my peers and my parents and stuff like that, probably unnecessarily, but I just felt like there was always something missing,
Do you remember the first time you sort of discovered music? Was there a particular band or artist or song you heard on the radio that you have very vivid memories of?
Yeah, my mum talks about this. So, like she said, when I was a kid, that I used to be able to memorize Top of the Pops, the charts really, really well. I think I had a thing for memorizing melodies. They got me a small Casio keyboard. I think that was the second instrument I had. They bought me this little drum kit, which seemed to, I've got memories of it just disappearing one day. But they did get me this little Casio keyboard with headphones, and because I was just on these things all the time, and I used to sit in front of the TV and I would mimic the TV theme tunes, and it was the Hovis advert, Dvorak's New World Symphony. That was the Hovis advert that everybody came to remember it as, and I just used to learn it by ear. And it just kind of went from there. But I used to listen to some crazy stuff as a kid, much to my dad's dismay. I was quite into Bros, and he was into things like Cream and Led Zeppelin and stuff like that, which also played an influence. But that was probably my earliest memory.
And do you remember what sort of spiritual background, if any, that you were instilled with as a youngster? Do you remember faith or God ever sort of coming up in conversations with your parents?
Not really. I mean, my mum took me to the odd Sunday school service. I think that's just, parents doing things with their kids on it at the weekend. That was a thing. I do remember sitting on hard wooden floors and singing songs about Jesus in the assembly at primary school. But my grandmother, my family's from the Isle of Lewis, and she used to take me to church on a Wednesday evening and a Sunday, which was all in Gaelic as well. And if I really behaved, they would sing the last song in English, which was always really nice. And so my gran had a deep faith. The islands is, a rich Christian community up there. So I do have fond memories of that. And but that was about it, really.
You mentioned you went to study music at quite a high level. You say classically trained. Do you remember as a youngster ever feeling like it would be possible for you to kind of make a career in music?
I don't think so, and that's purely through ignorance. And I think I had all I knew was that I wanted something to do with music my whole life. It was like my thing, and I loved it. But I think other than my great uncle, who was quite a famous bagpiper, I didn't really know him that well. There wasn't anybody that was particularly musical in my family. My uncle Andrew's really good at singing some old crooners on the karaoke, but that's about as far as it went. But I just knew that I wanted to do music because without it, stuff didn't make sense. It was my way of again, I didn't really understand it at the time, but expressing myself emotionally. I didn't really grow up in an openly emotionally expressive environment. I think that's a cultural thing. It's very British and Scottish. But if you were quite high maintenance, you were told to be quiet, or if you were making a bit of a hoo-ha, you were kind of told to go to your room. But that was very much a cultural thing. So music for me was a way to just engage emotionally. But again, I didn't really understand that until quite recently.
Sure.
In terms of making a career out of it, I didn't really see the end game. I didn't know if I wanted to teach music. I think I might have wanted to do that because I was inspired by my own teachers. But in terms of being a professional musician, I didn't sing until I was in my mid-20s. It was just purely guitar playing. But I just didn't really understand what it meant. I just kind of went with the day-to-day basis of practicing and learning and developing my craft, as it were, with no idea of what I was getting myself into, if I'm being honest.
You studied at college, and what came next?
Well, I think I was alcoholic by the time I was 17. My parents separated when I was 15, and that my whole world just crumbled. If with everything else that was happening in my life, school wasn't particularly pleasant. There was a bit of bullying, but when my parents separated, nobody really spoke about it. I can't remember anybody saying, "How are you doing? How are you feeling? Let's talk about how you're feeling." And you just kind of got on with things. It was kind of like pull your socks up and just stick in, son. And and I had all these feelings and emotions, and I didn't know how to process it. So I blew off steam, as most teenagers do, because being a teenager is intense, man. So I went to a few parties and got drunk and smoked a bit of cannabis. And unfortunately, when I was 15, I was in the wrong place at the wrong time, and I got attacked and nearly lost my life. And my anxiety levels just went through the roof, and I started drinking on a daily basis because I thought that was the only way to help me get rid of this massive amount of stress. And by the time I was 17, I was alcoholic. So music college for me was pretty much a disaster, and I didn't become alcoholic overnight. It takes a lot of practice, but I did eventually pass that point of no return. To keep a long story very short, by the time I was 25, my life had just spiraled out of control, and I was homeless because I chose to be there where I could feed my addiction in peace, away from the persistent complaining of my mum and dad, who were just worried sick. But it was getting in the way of my drinking, which was my full-time job at that time. 24/7, you don't get paid, but it costs you absolutely everything, man. And I chose to be homeless and got a room in a hostel from the council. But very quickly, because of my behaviour, I was sleeping rough on and off the streets or sofa surfing for the better part of a year before I ended up in the Bethany Christian Centre.
You mentioned at 15 you were attacked and nearly lost your life. What happened?
That was a heavy one. Just at a party with friends. Grew up in a small town outside Edinburgh called Musselburgh. Just a community of friends. I drank a lot, and I think I went to the loo and accidentally broke something. And the person whose house it was didn't take too kindly to it and was quite inebriated themselves, and they took a baseball bat to me and nearly killed me. And that I was just terrified, absolutely terrified. And I was told that if I told anybody, that there'd be repercussions. So I just, I was already quite an insecure, anxious kid. I was just terrified of everything. And if it wasn't alcohol that I was using to shield the way that I was coping, it was my behaviour. So I became very dishonest about the way that I felt. I would lie like it was second nature about my circumstances to try and get acceptance from my peers and stuff. And all that was doing was just creating a bigger boundary between me and my peers because they thought I was just full of nonsense, But again, nobody really knew what was going on because I wasn't able to get honest about my struggles and the pain that I was in.
Mm-hmm. There's often different reasons, aren't there, for why someone reaches that, I think you call it the point of no return, where it goes from, yes, I'm enjoying a drink, or yes, I'm a heavy drinker, to actually, no, this is kind of full-blown dependency, alcoholism. Are you able to pinpoint kind of the reason or reasons why that tipping point took place?
It's complicated, and as you said, I think everybody has a different journey. I don't really know when that point of no return happened. I just know that it came from a place of emotional brokenness. I went through some trauma therapy a few years ago. I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and I mean, I just thought I was mad my whole life. You know what I mean? I must have diagnosed myself with every mental health disorder I could think of, and even probably invented a few. But it turns out there are other people that suffer from this, and the biggest symptom is avoidance. So avoidance, and alcohol is probably the best emotional painkiller in the world. It works. But for an alcoholic, when it stops working and you can't stop drinking, that is a firm indicator that you're an alcoholic. And that was me. Once I started, I couldn't stop, and when I did stop, I couldn't stay stopped. And those are the two fundamental qualifiers to being an alcoholic.
Yeah,
really.
I think I'm right in saying a lot of recovery programs suggest that the first step is acknowledging I am an alcoholic. Do you remember where that point came in the journey for you of understanding this is actually a problem and sort of choosing, I suppose, to begin to try and deal with it?
It's a difficult journey, the sort of progression over 10 years. And even beyond that, I've had a few pennies drop in my recovery and my sobriety as well. It's always a learning thing and being a work in progress. But there was indicators in my early 20s when things just always kept going wrong and my life was unmanageable. You talk about the first step in the 12-step program, which is I was powerless to my addiction. And I was, I think, ignorant to it as well, but also quite comfortable in my unmanageability because, the thought of getting sober and being free and living a different life was utterly terrifying because I didn't know anything else. You know what I mean? When I remember talking to somebody about getting sober and just thinking, how the heck am I going to meet a girl if I'm not going to the pub? With this complete delusion that women only go to the bar. You know what I mean? You can't find them anywhere else, man. But that whole unmanageability part, from the age of 15, round about when my parents split up, but also before that, with just trying to seek friends, and I wasn't great at making friends and stuff like that. So in some ways, my life was always quite unmanageable. And there's arguments to whether you've always been an addict even before you picked up a drink or a drug. But everybody's different. Everybody has different views on the different models of addiction. But all I know is that the thing that keeps me clean and sober is a 12-step program. And my faith and
Yeah.
submitting everything to God to the best of my ability, and being accountable to both God and my peers.
I'd love to pick up the story again of you were homeless, and Bethany Christian Trust was a massive turning point for you, because this was a homeless shelter that you went to, and this was where you found faith, wasn't it? So just tell us what happened there.
Well, I was in the Bethany Centre, who were wonderfully kind and gave me a bed. I moved in there on the 13th of February 2006. They offered a recovery program which was similar to a 12-step program called Foundations for Freedom, but it was very Christ-centered and, drew its recovery from Scripture, and it still does to this day. I'm very good friends with the charity. As well as the program, which, I didn't have a lot of interest in. I wanted to get sober and stay sober, obviously, but the faith side of it wasn't high on my priority list. But there was a bed there, I was getting free food, and I was warm, and that for me was very high on my priority list. They would take you to activities like playing football or out for dinner or day trips, and they would occasionally invite you to Christian meetings and stuff like that, because that's what Christians do. Christian meetings, man. Always biscuits. It's wonderful. But
always biscuits, tea and biscuits at the end.
Absolutely. But there was a free 5-course dinner at this evening of music and testimony that we were invited to, and I'd never had 5 courses before, so I wanted to see what the other 2 courses were.
Yeah, what are they?
You know what? I can't remember. I just remember being slightly disappointed that the last course was a cup of coffee. But
that doesn't count, surely.
I don't know, but it's, talk about it. I must have been quite ungrateful. But it was. I remember it being very lovely and very hospitable. But in the middle of it, a man got up and gave his testimony. A wonderful man called Cammy McKenzie, and he shared his testimony, and it was quite unexpected, because I thought he's a church minister, and I thought he was going to tell me about how holy he was and how unholy I was, and I wouldn't be holy unless I had what he had, etc. So he kind of stood up, and I rolled my eyes, but he spoke about his life, and he's got some story. He grew up in a gang culture, they went to prison. He's a recovered addict, and it was just incredible. I felt like every single word that he spoke was meant for me that night. And he spoke about how Christ gave him the strength to break the chains that had been killing him, and the power to walk away from that life reborn, and with a sense of purpose and hope. And I just knew that I wanted it, but I was wrestling with myself, because I'm like, if you stand up and go forward, you're going to look like an idiot. But I did it because I knew that this is what I needed. And when I turned around, all the other guys from the hostel were following me, So wow. It was like we all responded to the altar call, and we went forward and we prayed and we thanked Christ for coming and living and dying and redeeming us and rising again. But I remember also praying my own prayer, which was, God, if you can hear me, I am so sorry for wasting everything. And I'm so sorry for the things that I've done. I just want a life that's worth something. And if that means following you, then I'm in it. I'm in. And I felt something move inside me for the first time, because I'm so emotionally numb at times. And I know that was the Holy Spirit melting my heart. And I broke down, which is very un-Scottish. I cried. But I essentially went from a man who thought he was the centre of the universe, which is the nature of addiction, to suddenly looking out at something I didn't understand, but I knew I wasn't alone. Fundamentally, I wasn't alone, and that was the start of my journey with Jesus.
That sounds like a pretty radical transformation, in that moment, in that altar call, which is superb to hear. And yet, at the same time, as you've already said in this interview, a lot of this stuff just doesn't happen overnight, and a lot of it is a journey. And you said even a few months or a couple of years ago, sort of other turning points happen. So just walk me through a little bit of what happened after that moment, because while it sounds like you had a wonderful encounter with God, and that was the moment of the beginning of the transformation, of course, it didn't end there. So what sort of things had to kind of fall into place after that moment of that initial prayer of commitment?
Well, I went back to the hostel that night, and it wasn't like, yeah, I'm a Christian, here's a Ferrari, you know what I mean? I had one change of clothes, and I was living in a homeless hostel. I don't think I even had a bank account at the time, but I went home that night with gratitude for having very little, and I was very, very hopeful. And these things are monumental if you've been living for years with none of that, And I had such a sense of peace in my life as well, for the first time. If you've grown up anxious or just been anxious your whole life, to suddenly have a bit of peace, it's like somebody just putting mute on the radio or the telly or something when you're trying to hear yourself think. It's incredible. And I just started noticing the world outside me, and I was really excited. I was that sort of young Christian on fire for life. You know what I mean? I finished my recovery course in Bethany, started going to church, made some friends, attended Bible nights and stuff like that. I met who is now my wife at the church. I got baptized, eventually got married. I remember getting baptized, and my whole family, which is enormous, came to the church, and the church was just rammed. It was just amazing. I started writing music when I was in the homeless hostel, songs about being homeless and being an addict, and stuck it on MySpace. And, that was quite a thing. And I just, I got quite a bit of a response from people, because I spoke about some really tough stuff, but people seemed to engage with that. I was a full-time dad to my stepson. I gained a son when I got married, and eventually we had a couple of our own kids. And by that time, I'd been invited to write about my faith and sing songs about my faith, and got the opportunity to record an album. And when I released that album, I did an event one night at a local church, and the minister said, "This is what you're meant to do with the rest of your life. It's to share the gospel through your music and testimony." And I'd been praying every day, asking God, what's my purpose, And that's when I started full-time as a musician and a singer-songwriter. Not a worship leader at that point, but certainly singing folk songs about my faith and about the journey that I'd been on. So that was about 2010, and I continued doing that up until about 2014.
I'd love to talk a bit more about your involvement in Christian music and in worship music. Just before we get there, one of the things you've been described as by others is a mental health advocate. So I'd love to just delve into that a little bit more. What exactly does that mean, and how exactly does that play into, I guess, your calling at the moment?
I think mental health is certainly something that we all need to be talking about with others and with ourselves, which sounds a little interesting. But we all live with mental health. Sometimes it can be very healthy, and sometimes it can be quite unhealthy, depending on where we're at. I was completely unaware of my mental health to a large extent until I got some help a few years ago, especially with the PTSD diagnosis, and went and did some cognitive behavioral therapy and also some trauma therapy, and that really helped me to understand why I reacted some of the ways that I did, and also some of the environment I grew up in. And I was also able to finally figure out how I was feeling, because I didn't understand my emotions and my thoughts for a long time. And through that process, I actually wrote some new songs about loneliness and depression and anxiety and all these things, and did a crowdfunder and released an album. And the music, which was the main part, wasn't actually the most important part. The most important part was to get people talking about how they were doing, to start a conversation. It was about being emotionally transparent, which is quite countercultural in Scotland, especially for men. Very often the only place that you're given permission to get emotional is at a football match, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's to get people talking about how they were doing. Like my friend says, if you walk into the pub and say, "All right, lads, I'm feeling a bit vulnerable tonight," you're given the choice of a slap or a pint, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
to get people talking about their feelings and their emotions, I really think that's important, because vulnerability invites vulnerability, and to realize that we're not alone in this, it can really open the door to healing. And for me personally, it opened up my relationship with Jesus in ways I never thought possible, because I was able to come to Christ without feeling I had to prove anything, you know what I mean? Because he knows it all already, and I feel that if people can be that open and transparent about where they're at, it can really enrich their faith and their lives.
Yeah, I love what you say about it enriching our faith as well, because it's not that God only cares about our spiritual life, he cares about our physical well-being and our mental well-being as well. And yet, as you say, I think particularly for men, we just live in a culture, don't we, of this stuff not really being spoken about too much. I think things are changing, and we've seen, haven't we, campaigns even from the royal family beginning to talk more about mental health. But you're right, that particularly amongst men, it's not an easy subject to bring up with other guys, is it?
Not Really, it's not the talking point, the main talking point of a conversation. I'm usually met with comments like, "Oh, you're so honest," but the truth is, I need to be that honest in order to stay well, and so I think it's very important for me, my recovery, and also for the people in my family, because it's not just for me, it's for the people that I really care about as well. So it keeps me well. But people talking about mental health, I think it's absolutely wonderful that people like the royal family are talking about mental health and the campaigns that they're doing, and the celebrities that are talking about their own vulnerabilities and the struggles that they're going through, because very often TV and being a celebrity can create quite a distance, but at the end of the day, these people are people, and they're beautiful, and they're God's creation as well, and they're going to have these struggles, and there's nothing wrong with feeling bad. You know what I mean? It is completely normal. Our emotions are usually there to tell us that something's going on. I mean, fear stops you getting hit by a bus if you're crossing the road at the wrong time, and it tells you need to get out of the way or you're going to get hurt, mate. You know what I mean? So it's necessary sometimes,
Yes.
and it's just that acceptance of understanding that you're okay.
Yes.
And but talking to people about it and being open and honest about it can certainly help you understand that you're not losing your mind.
Yeah.
We can help each other out of the rising tide by carrying each other, which is just such a beautiful thing. You know what I mean?
Do you want to stay informed on the best of what's happening in the UK church today? Premier Christianity magazine is for you. The UK's leading Christian magazine is published every month and features interviews with Christian leaders, in-depth reporting, reviews, columnists, and loads more. And best of all, you can try it for free. Head to our website now to request the latest edition, worth £5.95, completely free of charge.
Visit premierchristianity.com/free sample.
Tell me a little bit about the music you're making now. You're making worship music. You've got this new single out called No Other Gods. How did you arrive at a place where you're not making sort of mainstream folk music? You're not making kind of Christian music. You're actually making worship music now. Has there been a bit of a progression for that in sort of finding your distinct calling?
Yeah, it's been really interesting, man. Life has always got surprises around the corner. And after I released my mental health album, Gold, I had a conversation with Steve Harding, who's the A&R guy at Integrity, and his father-in-law is a good friend of mine, and we just had a chat, and he said, "I love your album. I'd love to work with you sometime if we'd love to work with you." And at the time I was like, well, I don't know what I'd have to offer, man, if I'm being honest, because I've not done a lot of worship music, But then we got to know each other, and I realised very, very quickly that Integrity, although it comes under the banner of a record label / publisher, it's a family, and it's a ministry. And when we had the first writing camp, I was just overwhelmed with that sense of community as well, which was just right up my street, because that's what I'm into when in terms of the recovery community and the charity stuff that I do in the prison ministry and stuff. And they were able to organise rights, and I realised, man, this is such an honour and a privilege to be able to worship freely, but also get together with people who also have a heart to worship God, and then write and then explore the scriptures. And also, from my background, write about struggles and pain and stuff like that, and see if I can incorporate that into the worship music. And getting onto my single, I really kind of explored, well, if I'm going to write worship music, what do I want to write about? Obviously, I want to love and honour God, but what are the needs of my community? And I asked our youth pastor, and he said it's things like broken homes, it's mental health, it's struggles with identity. And I'm like, that's my story, So I went on this journey, and Integrity put me in the room with some great folk, and we started writing these songs. No Other God came out of a write when I was in Nashville at the end of 2019, and the guy I was writing with, Michael Farron, who's a wonderful writer, his wife has some Scottish ancestry, and they went exploring it, and it turns out that she's got some serious connection to a very old noble Scottish family, and compared to her background and where she grew up, it's a complete contrast. And the other inspiration for it was Isaiah 61:10, which is, the Lord is, He has clothed us in salvation and adorned us with a robe of righteousness. I'm paraphrasing here because I can't remember it verbatim, but and her story was talking about that, and we kind of weaved the two together, because despite our doubts and our fears and our feelings of self-worth and the identity that we give ourselves in this life and in the world that we're in, Christ has a very different identity for us, and He comes and he puts that upon us, and He loves us for who we are in our brokenness, and that's how we came about with the song.
Fantastic. Well, let's play a little clip of it. This is No Other God by Steph Macleod.
No other God can judge the weight of sin that dwells in us, and yet amid His grace, His blood declares my guilt erased. What is this love, this ancient hope? You come to me with righteous robes, clothing me in your salvation.
And that was Steph Macleod's new single, No Other God. Steph, it's difficult for me to do any interviews these days without mentioning the dreaded word COVID-19, which has completely changed all of our lives. How's it affected you?
It's been a tough year. It's been, 2020 was, for me personally, was not pleasant. The whole situation melted my brain, figuratively speaking. I went from having this routine, recovery routine and health routine, and I thrive on routine, to suddenly feeling very isolated, and isolation is not good for my recovery at all. I am so grateful that I am still well and sober, and for the people that I have in my life that have helped me to get that. But last year there were times when I was feeling very depressed, and I went to see the doctor twice for having suicidal thoughts. Which is, there's nothing wrong with having these thoughts. It's not acting on it that can put you in danger. So I went to see, I sought help and reached out, and the people in the NHS that I saw were just incredible, absolutely brilliant. There is help out there, and I just introduced a few more things into my life the best way that I could. So I started eating more healthy, I started connecting people a bit more, and I started working out a bit more, running with my dog and stuff. My wife works for the NHS, so she's a key worker, so she's been hard at it. And I was homeschooling the kids, and which is wonderful. It's been a real change being at home so much. I can't remember the last time I was at home so much. But essentially, we've been unemployed. Well, I've been unemployed, but we've been very grateful for my wife's income. And just learning to serve in different ways, which is via Zoom, or we've been doing collaboration videos with and streaming stuff with a ministry that I'm involved in called Celtic Worship, which has been bringing a lot of joy to people and really helping them. So we made some of our videos available as a church resource for people. That's still available. Just get in touch with Celtic Worship via the website, and if you need those videos and music for your church streams, please just get in touch with us. And I've been doing the same. I've been learning to adapt, and I've just been fitting this little studio together, and it's actually a closet in our house. So I've made it into a little musical sanctuary where I read my Bible and write songs and do songwrites over Zoom. But it's taken a good bit of time to kind of figure that out. Steve at Integrity has been amazing, and we've managed through 2020 to put this EP together, and No Other God is the first track from that. So we did get movement, but for me, adjusting has been tough. But I am grateful.
I mean, I imagine before COVID struck, I imagine you were visiting churches or other music venues and playing live. Now, all of that must have more or less dried up for you. Has that been quite difficult to not be out there as a musician playing live to people?
Yes and no. Yes. So like playing live is the easy part, man. It really is. But the traveling and being away from home and the admin stuff, which I'm just not built for, it was really tough, and I was getting a bit of help in that just before lockdown. I'd actually had my visa for touring in the States approved the week the first lockdown happened. And I've not even been able to get to Belfast to get my passport stamped back at the embassy because of COVID and stuff, which is totally fine. It's just the way it goes. But the plans that I had in terms of the next few years and just completely changed. And there's just no live music at all at the moment. We're very, very lucky that my wife is working for the NHS, which is a secure income at the moment. But I know loads of people that just haven't been able to. Their lives are just very, very different. You know what I mean? I can't speak for where they're at, but there's no live music. I'm a real people person. I like to go and worship and do live music, but it's also the conversations at the end, which I absolutely love, and talking to people about their faith and getting them asking questions about their walk with Jesus, because that is the greatest privilege as a worship leader. Because I think it's Bob Coughlin writes in his book True Worshippers. In fact, it might not be Bob Coughlin, it might be my friend in Texas that said this, but 90% of worship leading is what happens outside of the music part. You know what I mean? It's about discipleship, and it's about asking people where they're at, and it's about helping them to enrich their relationship with Jesus. And I really miss that, man. I really miss that. So I'm looking forward to getting back into the fellowship and just fellowshipping with my brothers and sisters and spending time with Jesus.
How do you think all this should play out online? With a lot of churches now live streaming their Sundays, what a lot of churches are doing is that they're still getting the worship leader or the worship band into the building, and they're kind of playing like they would do on a quote unquote normal Sunday. And then people at home are encouraged to join in, so to sing along with the television, and you can still raise your hands. And is that the best way of going, that we try and just sort of film what we would have normally done and people watch it on a live stream? Or do you think this is an opportunity to actually completely reinvent and reimagine our understanding of sung worship and how we do that?
That's a really interesting question, and I think there's a few different answers that we could explore there. I think the churches and worship leaders and that have done an incredible job at engaging with people, because the news, which is very informative, it's very depressing, man. And I've spoken to a number of my friends and who are really struggling. I'm speaking to myself when I'm saying this. I'm just like, turn off the news for a week, man. Yeah. Just turn it off. If something big's going down, your neighbour will tell you, or somebody will give you a phone. But unless there's just not a lot to keep you nice and cheerful watching the news, And so, like, the worship leaders and the churches and stuff like that have done an incredible job of engaging with people, and with the wonders of technology, I think it's been phenomenal, and we're doing the best at what we can. Does that need to change? Well, the way that we're looking at worship, I think that's something that's always happening. People are always looking at exploring worship. I know Jeremy Riddle's got a really interesting book out at the moment called The Reset, and there's other people that have been looking at what this has given us time to really kind of sit and think about the worship demographic, which is quite varied as it is. You've got the really sort of contemporary stuff on one side, and you've got the very traditional stuff on the other side, and then you've got this massive bit in the middle, So I think people can look at these things, but essentially it's just about worshipping Jesus. I think it's that simple. And whether that's looking on the TV, which if that's all you can do because you're out working as a doctor all day, or you're looking at watching kids all day, I think that's incredible that we have the ability to do that, These are deep questions that some worship leaders, or every worship leader, should maybe always be asking. Is my heart in the right place, or am I being distracted by technology or learning this, or am I putting too much time into that? I mean, these are the things that I struggle with. I could have spent time writing this song instead of learning about compression, in my studio. Or is this going to benefit what I'm doing it, or is this just for fun or whatever? But I think it's a complex question. I don't think there is a right answer, but there's nothing wrong with exploring these things if it's in a healthy way.
It's been amazing to see how music is traveling. I mean, music always has traveled, using the technology available at the time, right? So when I was growing up, it was cassettes, and you'd pass your cassette around at school or whatever. CDs. We had the weird mini disc phase, which I think a few people bought into, but most people ignored. Anyway, the point is that we're now in a position with technology and the internet that music is traveling faster and further than ever before in world history. And I was mindful of that as I was looking at some of the worship music videos you've put out and your friends at Celtic Worship as well, getting thousands of views from all over the world. And you read through the YouTube comments of people in very far-flung places who are blessed by the music you're putting out.
It's just overwhelming, absolutely overwhelming. My friend Mary, who's the fiddle player in Celtic Worship, wanted to put on a church service for the Celtic Connection Festival in Glasgow, where visitors could come to the church and there would be Celtic music infused with traditional hymns. And we just got together and through invitation we did that. We never expected it to grow into what it is. We recorded an album because people were asking for it, so it's grown really organically. And then we had a Zoom meeting. Everybody's doing Zoom meetings, but we had a Zoom meeting and it was like, what can we do to feed into the church? And we thought, well, we could do some socially distanced live streaming. So we all did our own one from home. And as the first lockdown eased off, we got together and had a socially distanced worship night just with us and the tech crew. And the stories of people being coming in, just saying, this, you've no idea how much we needed this, but also connecting to some of their family roots, like in America and stuff like that. It's just been amazing. So that, again, this sense of community and fellowship, which is really kind of what the church is all about, man. It's just such a blessing to both us and thankful, to other people as well. So it's just a privilege, an absolute honor and a privilege to be a part of something that seems to be making a positive difference and with other people's lives with Christ at the center.
In the next issue of Premier Christianity magazine, we've got Matt Redman writing for us, well-known worship leader. And he writes in the new issue, it's coming out this coming week, about really the main thing he's focusing on in his songwriting, the main thing he feels challenged about in writing songs. And that is that, in his words, he says we've got a lot of worship songs that can be a bit too me-centered, me-focused. And we need more songs about the holiness of God. And Matt says in the piece that it's very easy to sing about attributes of God that are beneficial for us. So God as healer, or God as our strong tower, God as our father. These are very obvious ways in which God being those things benefits us. But Matt says we need more songs actually about the attributes of God that may not have any helpful benefit to me, but are still integral to who God is. God's majesty, God's holiness, God's glory. We need more songs like that, which I thought was a really interesting thing for Matt to say, who has written a lot of songs, that he now feels challenged on this point to write more songs on the holiness of God. And I just wanted to get your take on that.
No, yeah, of course. Why wouldn't you? I think it's if you're going to sing worship and sing to God about how awesome He is, then I think that's wonderful.
But do you think that sometimes worship leaders have been guilty of writing a lot of songs with the word I in or me in? Do you think that's a fair criticism?
I think there's certainly songs that exist that are like that, but there are songs that aren't, traditionally considered congregational music that can be considered a song of worship as well. So if you're singing a song, I mean, this is a broad argument, and don't get me wrong, I absolutely love Matt Redman's songs. I mean, it was some of the first songs I heard going into the church that mean so much to me, and it's interesting that he's on that journey, and I'd be really excited to see what comes out of it. For me, I think songs, you can write and sing a song about the glorious attributes of God. You can also write a song about where you're at. I mean, if you look at the Psalms, a lot of that is very much based in God. This is where I'm at. Where are you? There you are, or this is what you've done in my life. And there's just a whole broad spectrum of stuff which could be considered parts of a song that can be considered worship. For me personally, I think it's a song is where you're at that time, and if you want to talk about what God's doing in your life, I don't think that's a problem. If you feel like you want to write a song that's specifically about the attributes to God and the Holy Spirit is leading you into that, then yeah, that's great. In terms of where the worship community is right now, there are a lot of songs that are very I centered, but when I go and speak to somebody and tell them about God, I can talk to them about who God is. I love doing that. I tell them about Jesus, but I'll also tell them about what He's done in my life, which I think is equally important, because people can relate to personal experience as well. So for me personally, and this could probably be argued across the board. I think it's a mixture of the two, and it's just about finding that balance.
Yeah, if there's a way of doing both in the same song, perhaps, is interesting question. Are there any themes that are particularly on your heart when it comes to songwriting for the year ahead? I mean, Matt sort of laid out where he's at with wanting to focus on the holiness of God. Are there other aspects of worship that you feel like you want to be writing in that kind of a direction this year?
I'm looking at the Psalms quite deeply at the moment. I think there's coming out of the COVID situation is going to be difficult to process for us. We lost a few family members in the last year in different circumstances, and I wasn't able to get to my grandmother's funeral at the beginning of December just for safety reasons, but we're going to have a memorial next year. My wife tragically lost her sister, which wasn't COVID related, but it was just really tragic. So it's been a tough year, I'm sure, for everybody for different reasons, and I've been looking at the Psalms and relating to a lot of the struggles and the emotional struggles with these things, and I've got lament on my heart, and I think for me personally, I'm going to be looking at writing into that stuff, but also coming out of that process as well. So I think songwriting's a process and a journey. So it'll be interesting to see where the Holy Spirit guides me going down that road, and I'm hopefully going to be connecting to some of my friends who I admire and respect, and we can write some stuff that might be able to benefit and feed into the church as well.
It's January, and of course in January a lot of people sort of look at how they can, I guess, better themselves, new Bible reading plans that Christians want to engage with, but also a lot of people will say, well, after Christmas I need to lose a bit of weight. Now, I noticed that you most certainly have had an amazing journey of weight loss. I was looking back at some photos and videos of you from a few years ago. You're a changed man. You're a different man. So do you have any top secrets or tips to share with us on that front?
It's not complicated. I've just eaten a little healthier and worked out a little bit more and drank a little bit more water and slept, made sure I get my 8 hours in, and that's it. Thrive on routine. Getting out the starting blocks is hard for exercise. It is difficult, but if you give yourself at least 3 months, and you should see yourself a different. My journey was a bit complicated. My metabolism was pretty much shocked because of the medication I was on for a very long time, and when I came off that, it took about 3 months of exercise, but also I was in a lot of pain as well because of my weight, my knees. So I wasn't able to take certain medications. So when you're in enough pain, you'll do something about it. And exercise and losing weight certainly helped my knees. But it's just about eating nutritious food. I cut sugar out my diet. I watched how many carbs I was eating. I mean, you do need carbs, otherwise you go mad. Well, I do anyway. I just get very grumpy, and it's just. Yeah, healthy diet, healthy routine, and not being too hard on yourself when you have a treat.
It's not easy, is it? It takes grit and willpower and determination.
Yeah, I mean, I hate exercise. I'm not gonna. I am a bear, man. I'm built for hibernation. But in terms of mental health, I love the way it makes me feel. In terms of so I'll come out of a workshop. I'll go and do a 5K run, which I never thought I'd ever be able to do. And I'll come back. My wife's like, you're very chilled out, and it's because of the endorphins and natural endorphins. So exercise makes me feel very grounded and very calm. And when I'm tired, it's because I've earned it. So yeah, I love the way exercise makes me feel, but it is a grind, man. It is a grind, but I do get into it.
There you go. Some top tips there. Well, Steph, it's been a real pleasure to chat. We've covered all sorts of deep but really important topics as well. I'm aware, particularly in talking about your battle with addiction, what would be your message to someone who might be listening to this, who resonates perhaps with certain parts of your story, whether it be mental health or addiction or even homelessness? Anyone who's feeling like they need a bit of help. Are there places that you would particularly want to signpost people to say actually that please, take the opportunity to ask for help, and help is available? I mean, you mentioned a couple in passing, Bethany Trust, even the NHS. But what would be your message to someone who, if they're honest, to say, yeah, Steph, it's great to hear your story, but I'm struggling like you are with some of these things. What would be your advice to them?
Well, you're not alone is the first thing I want to say. You're definitely not alone. There is help out there. Very often it's not signposted. My first bit of advice would be to go and see your doctor and just be honest about what you're struggling with. You might not get what you need, but they should be able to point you in the right direction of something. Google's your friend. Also, in terms of mental health, the NHS is also a great place to call, but there are also support groups. Speak to your pastor as well, and remember that if they don't understand what you're like, if they can't help directly, they will be able to point you, or they might be able to point you in the direction of somebody. And if you're really struggling, you can drop me a message on my Facebook page, and I can point you in the direction of a few places, because I'm more than happy to do that. But there is lots of help out there, so please just do get in touch and realise that you're not alone. And you might think that you can't get through this on your own. And you know what? I thought the exact same thing, but I was able to get through it with the help of somebody else.
Well, Steph, thank you so much for sharing. It's been an absolute pleasure to chat.
Thank you very much.